Well, good evening, everybody. This is Jim Ostrowski with an Eagles Environmental Support Division, and I welcome you to our PFAS Town Hall tonight regarding the Arbor Hills landfill. We get about 51 people logged on already, so that's good to see, and I'm sure we'll have a few more people come on as we get started. I'm just going to kick it off with a couple basic logistical details for tonight. Right now, all the lines are muted. We are recording this meeting like we do all of our public meetings, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel in a day or two coming up. So you'll be able to see it there if you have to check out early or something tonight. I'll go over this later, but go over it now as well. We are here to present to you as well as answer your questions. So if you have a question tonight, there's a couple of different ways you can ask them. You can type them into the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get through as many of those as we can today. You can also click the raise hand icon on your Zoom toolbar, and that'll tell us that you want to ask a question, and I will call you out and unmute your microphone so you can raise your hand. Also, there's a few of you, it looks like, that are calling in on your phone. And on your phone, of course, you can't see me, but if you have a question, you can hit #2. Again, that's the #2 button on your phone. That'll raise your hand, and I will call you by the last few digits of your phone number. And then you can ask your question over the phone. It'll unmute you to do that. That's all I've got in terms of introductory stuff. You'll hear from me later on. I'm going to turn it over to Abigail Hendershot. But Abby.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Thanks everybody for showing up tonight and for coming to the town hall. My name is Abigail Hendershot. I am the MPART Executive Director for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and we're happy to have with you. That is my contact information if you've got any questions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through quick introductions, logistics, agenda, and then also talk to you about what PFAS is. A little brief overview of that. Lisa Fisher is our toxicologist from the Department of Health and Human Services. She's going to talk to you about the health effects of PFAS and some of the things to look for. Brett Coulter is our project manager from EGLE, from the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. And he will talk to you about the contamination and groundwater investigation, other investigation work going on at the landfill. Brian Zuber is our PFAS specialist out of surface water. He's going to talk to you about stormwater and surface water sampling that's been done around the landfill. And then Scott Miller is from our air quality division and is going to talk to you about some of the air issues that have been ongoing, but aren't necessarily central to the PFAS, but we thought we'd at least give you an update there. And then I'll come back at the end and we'll talk about the MPART website and any potential information you might want to know. Plenty of time for questions and answers. Go ahead and pop them in, and we will get you a copy of the PDF of these slides while we're talking here. So next slide. So let's just talk briefly about what MPART is. So as I said, MPART is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. It was created in 2017, but re-established in 2019 as an enduring body. And so it is housed in the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, but it is specifically tasked with coordinating and collaborating on a multi-agency approach among 7 different departments to work on PFAS issues, because PFAS is pretty complex. It crosses a lot of department responsibilities, and as you'll see, we've got a lot of multi-agency issues going on. Helps us really work on the state strategy for PFAS. So let's go to the next slide. So PFAS are what we call per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS is the whole family of compounds. They all have strong carbon-fluorine bonds. They all have surfactant properties. They have a lot of uses in our industrial world. They are all great for repelling waters, oils, fats, greases. Started developing them in the late 1940s, but today we have somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 different PFAS compounds that are in use. But so what are we concerned about? Obviously, we are finding them pretty widespread through our ecosystem. They don't break down naturally. They don't biodegrade. But they do bioaccumulate, and some of the PFAS, some of the longer chain ones that we'll be talking about today, actually do build up in our bodies. And so Lisa will be talking to you about that. She'll also be talking to you about PFAS and potential health effects. What we know is we have some data for a couple of compounds, PFOS and PFOA being the majority of them, but we still need a lot more science and a lot more information on PFAS as a family and all of those compounds. And so at this point, we're still lacking federal standards, but Michigan does have a few standards that I'll tell you about here in a second. Next slide. So PFAS is used in quite a wide variety of different commercial industrial uses in our society. And so some of the things that are already in your homes are the Scotchgard in your carpets, your carpet cleaning products, food packaging, anything where you have a grease resistant wrapper, will be probably coated in some sort of PFAS. Your Scotchgard on your couches, cosmetic, outdoor gear, anything that's waterproofed, your Gore-Tex clothes, adhesives and sealants have a lot of PFAS, makes them spread easier, protective coatings, your Teflon pans, of course. And then the big one that we have been dealing with and have some issues here at the landfill as well is firefighting foam. When we have really hot hydrocarbon fires, we often will use PFAS-based AFFF, and that is something that has become a really big problem in our world. So let's go to the next slide. So this is what we call our PFAS cycle. You will see from this illustration that PFAS can come from a variety of sources, but it also can cycle through our ecosystem. And so if we start with a industry that might be using PFAS and part of its processing, there's a potential for them to have a direct discharge to groundwater, potentially a direct discharge to a stream or to the air. But there's also that potential for it to get into our wastewater treatment plants. Our wastewater treatment plants are not designed to take out PFAS. And so we've had a lot of source reductions at some of these industries with some of Michigan's efforts to try to eliminate those sources and try to keep our concentrations at our wastewater treatment plants down, because then when it leaves the wastewater treatment plants, there are sludges from those plants, and often that's applied as nutrients to our farm fields. And so it's important to keep PFAS out. Conversely, we're talking about landfills today. The landfills send their leachate to wastewater treatment plants, and the wastewater treatment plants often send their sludges back to the landfills. And so again, we're trying to cut off as many of this cycling of PFAS through our environment. So it's really important to look at all the different routes that PFAS might travel, because ultimately what we're working on is protection of drinking water, protecting our residential drinking water homes, uptake into plants and animals, protecting our rivers and our fish. Let's go to the next slide. So Michigan currently has standards for 7 different PFAS compounds. These are all in parts per trillion. So these are the same standards for public drinking water supplies. So if you're on city water somewhere in the state, those municipal water supplies have to meet these standards for PFAS. These are health-based standards. Conversely, if there is groundwater contamination, these same standards are also used for groundwater cleanup criteria. So we have those same set of standards, 2 different purposes, but both are going to be protective for the environment and public health. Next slide. We do a lot of lakes and streams investigation. So Brian will talk to you about some of the surface water work that we have done already. Done a lot of fish sampling and foam sampling and surface water sampling across the state, trying to get a good handle on what those concentrations are in our fish, especially where we might have sources that might be discharging to surface water. Next slide. So right now, we're actually at 200 sites. We just had the other one yesterday, became our 200th site. And what you'll see on this map is it looks like there's a lot of PFAS sites in Michigan. And while that is true, it doesn't mean that Michigan has got a bigger problem than the rest of the country. It just means that Michigan's actually looking for PFAS. Many of our sister states and other states across the country have not started really looking for PFAS. Michigan's done a pretty deliberate inventory and prioritization of investigations to try to identify those sites that do exceed criteria for groundwater contamination. So all of these sites have groundwater contamination above those criteria that you saw. So we're really prioritizing. Most of these sites are going to represent your airports, your landfills, your tanneries, your military bases, your plating facilities, and other types of industrial sources. We've got 200 of them and probably many, many more to come. So let's go to the next slide. So the last slide I have here is just to talk to you about what we call our Citizens Advisory Work Group. So MPART is made up of the 7 different agencies, but we also have the Citizens Advisory Work Group that works with MPART specifically. They're a group of citizens who have been affected by PFAS directly. Most of them have either had instances where maybe their groundwater was contaminated or they live in a community that's been affected. And so they really work with MPART on engaging and empower those communities, helping us to educate the general public, have discussions on how do we best inform the public. And so those are all very important things for us. And I'll show you that on the website here in just a second. And then the next slide, I think, takes it over to Lisa. So Lisa, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Abby. So my name is Lisa Fisher, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some health outcomes associated with PFAS exposure, and then kind of what the role of DHHS is in these PFAS site investigations. So next slide. So the role of DHHS along with the local health department is to understand the unique concerns facing the community. And while EGLE leads the site investigation and collects the data, DHHS and the local health department lead any public health planning and response actions that are necessary. So our role is to evaluate PFAS exposure to residents in the community and then recommend public health actions as needed. Next slide. So like Abby said, there's a lot of different products that contain PFAS, which means there's a lot of different ways that people can be exposed to PFAS. The main pathway that we're concerned about is through ingestion. So people can be exposed to PFAS by drinking contaminated water or by eating fish that are caught in water bodies contaminated with PFAS. And we have some of that information in our Eat Safe Fish guidelines. Accidentally swallowing contaminated soil or dust that contains PFAS is another route of exposure, as well as eating foods that have been packaged in materials that contain PFAS. And then use of consumer products as well. And then PFAS absorption through the skin is typically not a concern. We're more concerned about the ingestion route versus skin contact. Next slide. So this is a graph that shows blood levels of some common PFAS in Americans from the years 2000 to 2014. And in 2002, a lot of US manufacturers started phasing out their use of PFOS or PFOS. And you can see this reflected in the blood levels of PFOS between 2000 and 2004. And so while some of these longer chain PFAS that have been around for a long time, like PFOS and PFOA, are starting to get phased out, manufacturers are replacing them with other PFAS that are shorter chained and typically spend less time in the human body, meaning they have a shorter half-life. Next slide. So we don't know as much about some of the newer PFAS that are being used in manufacturing. We have the most information about any associated human health outcomes with PFOA and PFOS. And some of those health outcomes include reduced fertility, high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, small decreases in infant birth weight, and higher cholesterol, specifically total and LDL cholesterol. Next slide. And some more health outcomes on this slide as well include thyroid disease, liver damage, decrease immune system response to vaccines, and for high exposure to PFOA, kidney and testicular cancers. And it's important to note that, it's important to note that someone who's been exposed to high levels of PFOA and PFOS doesn't mean that they'll necessarily develop any of these health effects. It would just mean that they would be more likely to develop these health effects than someone who has not had a high level of exposure. Next slide. And I included here some of the fish consumption guidelines that are in place for the middle branch of the Rouge River, specifically upstream of Phoenix Lake. So these are the guidelines that we have in place for some of the species. You can see that the contaminant of concern for these species is mercury and or PCBs. There have been fish that have been tested for PFOS. We're still waiting on the complete results for that to come back. So these are the guidelines that we have in place right now. And if people have more questions about this, feel free to contact me. They can also visit the Eat Safe Fish website at michigan.gov/eatsafefish. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Brett.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Brett Coulter. I'm the PFAS lead for the site. I'm a geologist out of the Jackson district, and I'm going to give an overview of the groundwater investigation activities at the site. Next slide, please. So before I do that, I'm going to go over a few background items. Drinking water, just to talk about drinking water in the area. Wayne County and Northville receives drinking water from the Detroit River, or GLWA. And that water gets sampled periodically, and those results have always been non-detect. And then residents in Salem Township generally have private drinking water wells. Next slide. So the residential wells in Salem Township, south of the site, were sampled. We identified several wells within a half mile of the southern portion of the property and sampled, Eagle sampled those in February 2020. 6 of those results were non-detect for PFAS, and 1 sample showed low-level PFAS detections. Those were resampled again in February 2022. We recently received those results, and they basically mimicked the 2020 results. 6 were non-detect, and 1 sample had low-level PFAS detections, well below drinking water standards. Next slide. So just to introduce the leachate and discuss the leachate at the landfill, since that is an issue related to PFAS. The definition of leachate is a liquid that has been in contact with waste or trash. So that includes precipitation that infiltrates, or any liquids that are brought in with the waste itself. Leachate at Arbor Hills does contain PFAS. Leachate is captured by gas extraction wells and also by sumps in the waste cells on the liner below the waste. This leachate is pumped into piping, and that routes it to leachate collection tanks on the southeast portion of the property. And then the collected leachate is either sent to sanitary sewers or pumped into trucks for disposal. Next slide. So just talking about a few of the features. This blue purple line represents the boundary of the waste fill area. Groundwater flow is typically to the southeast. The landfill detention pond that collects surface water is here in the southeast corner. Runoff ponds, can't see my cursor, I guess. Runoff ponds are on the east and south portion of it. Well, I should say south of the landfill. And PFAS and groundwater was detected in one well. That can't see the bottom of that slide, but the former recycling facility is down there in the south portion of the landfill. Next slide. So this is an overview now of the groundwater investigation on the site or at the site. In 2019, groundwater samples were collected from 5 monitor wells around the perimeter of the site. PFAS was detected in the 1 monitor well that was identified, or that one area in the southeast corner of the landfill, MPB 393. That 1 well exceeded criteria for PFAS. In March 2020, we added Arbor Hills landfill as an MPART site, and several investigations, additional investigations related to the groundwater were conducted during 2020 and 2021, primarily to identify the extent and trying to identify the source of PFAS in groundwater. Next slide. This shows a conceptual site model of the cross-section below the landfill. You could assume that the landfill is somewhere on the top of that. The pond could represent the detention pond. The monitor well could represent MPB 393. And the residential commercial well could represent wells within a half mile of the site to the south. The gray is a clay or silt, low permeability. Water moves very slow through that material. And then the yellow would be sandy or more permeable material, which water moves through much easier. These sandy layers are intermittent, with one layer to be somewhat continuous below the site, and that's where MPB 393 is installed. The aquifer identified as the lower aquifer in blue is well below the area where PFAS has been detected. Next slide. So a summary of the PFAS investigation, we identified, or GFL and Arbor Hills have identified 2 potential sources of PFAS: the unintentional leachate spills on the landfill that commingle with stormwater through the ditches and ponds, and as Abby mentioned earlier, from AFFF from the 2016 fire at the former recycling building. To date, PFAS in groundwater is limited just to the southeast corner of the landfill. GFL and Arbor Hills have done several investigations, including sampling of soil and groundwater, both west, south, and north of the detections in MPB 393, and pretty well defined the extent of PFAS. Anticipated actions for 2022. Arbor Hills is still finalizing the work plan to address PFAS in groundwater in that southeast corner, and it will probably be a form of source control and continued groundwater monitoring. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Zuber from Water Resources.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Zuber. I work in the emerging pollutant section of the Water Resources Division at Eagle. Most of my job involves working with industrial facilities that have stormwater contaminated with PFAS that discharge to our rivers, lakes, streams, and wetlands, including the Arbor Hills landfill. So this is kind of a zoomed out version. You can see I'm going to control the mouse here too. So the Arbor Hills landfill that Brett had shown here is outlined in the dark orange. Eagle recently collected surface water samples and got 1.02 parts per trillion for PFAS here and 2.11 parts per trillion of PFAS. This one's at 6 Mile. The first one was at Ridge. The PFAS water quality value is 12 parts per trillion. So that is different than the drinking water quality value. So I'm going to kind of go over the fish results that we got. And so at the fish hatchery park, they collected 10 brown trout from Johnson Drain. The PFAS levels range from 5.74 to 49.5 parts per billion. The average PFAS level was 17.7 parts per billion. Currently, DHHS is waiting on results for other contaminants to do a full evaluation of fish consumption guidelines. And so zooming in a little bit closer, the facility has, there's a lot going on. So we got the groundwater flow direction as Brett described here, south-southwest. We have permitted pumped groundwater ponds here and the associated discharge point just southeast of those into that unnamed tributary to Johnson Drain. Upstream there, we have the permitted stormwater discharge point, and that discharges stormwater collected in this detention pond that through these drainage ditches here in this wetland. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. And with the yellow here, we have the 2016 fire that occurred at the former recycling facility. And I'm going to go over that in a second too. The other thing not shown here, excuse me, is dealing with the sanitary sewer. So the Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority, or YUCA, the wastewater treatment plant, issues the permit to Arbor Hills for the discharge to the sanitary sewer. Under YUCA's upcoming MPDS permit that is slated to be reissued in fiscal year 2022, YUCA will be required to develop a local limit, also known as an effluent limit, for PFAS, which will apply to industrial discharges of PFAS to the wastewater treatment plant. Once the PFAS local limit is approved by Eagle and adopted into YUCA's Code of Ordinances, Arbor Hills will be required to meet the PFAS local limit. And currently, their sanitary waste is pre-treated for PFAS before it is discharged to the sanitary sewer. And moving on here, this is a zoomed in portion of those permitted pumped groundwater discharge ponds. So in these two ponds, the landfill sampled them last year and they got a range between 1.5 and 3.3 parts per trillion. When they did a discharge during December, 3 separate samples ranged from 1.4 to 1.8 parts per trillion. So, and again, our water quality value for the surface waters is 12. So with respect to those discharges, MMD, their materials management division, for which the division that Brett works under, has a compliance action that requires the pumps. The discharge from the pumped groundwater to surface water requires a discharge permit. If they did stop those pumps, then they would be in violation of MMD's compliance action. So sampling in the pumped groundwater ponds and their discharge, as I showed you, were well below the PFAS water quality value. That being said, the Water Resources Division permit section is not requiring PFAS monitoring from this discharge at this time. And moving to the 2016 fire, like Abby had mentioned before with AFFF, It's kind of a firefighting foam that contains PFAS in it. And during that fire, a AFFF was deployed. The firefighting wastewater was directed to the northeast of the facility, northeast into this detention pond here, and to the south to this detention pond. Both of those ponds were plugged either the day of or 1 or 2 days after the event. So this pond to the northeast was sampled, and the sample results ranged between 210 and 640 parts per trillion. And the one to the south ranged between 9.1 and 31 parts per trillion. Moving to storm and surface water, and we'll look at some suspected further impacts of that, of the AFFF. I'm going to start in the south here. This wetland complex here was sampled last year, had 5.8 to 7.8 part per trillion of PFAS. Moving up to this wetland, just south of the landfill, that had a range of 460 to 1800 parts per trillion. This was the highest sample that we got on the landfill during all the sampling that we've done, or that the landfill has done. The detention pond here, more associated with the landfill itself, ranged from 5.4 to 400 parts per trillion. Last year, Eagle collected a sample at the discharge and found 16.5 parts per trillion. Further downstream, the landfill collected samples here. This is right around the area that the groundwater ponds discharged to, and that ranged from 12 to 43 parts per trillion. And then further downstream yet, the landfill got some results of 2 to 9.6 part per trillion. So instances of spills of leachate on the landfill, so on the landfill here, have likely contaminated the stormwater, resulting in impacts to the detention pond. Sources of PFAS to the wetland, this wetland here, will need to be investigated, and corrective actions will have to be made to address those. Moving on to next steps. So the landfill just completed a sampling study, and we're going to have to complete the review of that characterization that was done on the on-site stormwater ponds and the discharges that were sampled. Moving forward from there, we will work with the landfill following our compliance strategy for addressing PFAS in particular. In this case, will be for industrial stormwater discharges. And that will include source identification, development and implementation of a corrective action plan, regular discharge sampling, typically done quarterly, and a set compliance date. This will be done through an administrative consent order that's a legally binding administrative agreement with the landfill to ultimately get them into compliance with the PFAS water quality value. And with that, I will move it over to Scott Miller.
Thank you, Brian. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this meeting. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a supervisor for the Air Quality Division, and many of you have probably met. I work out of the Jackson District Office, which covers 5 counties in South Central Michigan, including Washtenaw County. We wanted to take a few minutes in this meeting to provide a brief update on issues related to odors and the gas collection and control system at the landfill. I also wanted to remind everyone of the Eagle Arbor Hills website that contains up-to-date and historical information related to Eagle's investigations at the landfill. Next slide, please. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So as you are aware, we've been investigating odors at the landfill for the past couple years. We have also been working with the energy plant landfill called Arbor Hills Energy, or Fortistar. This was to resolve violations of their air emission limits. Recently, Eagle and the U.S. Department of Justice entered a settlement with the energy plant to reduce sulfur emissions at the plant. This will resolve past emission limit violations and significantly improve air emissions from the plant that uses the landfill gas to produce electricity. To accomplish these emission reductions, Arbor Hills Energy will be required to install a sulfur treatment system or a renewable gas plant. Eagle, along with the State Attorney General's office, is also in negotiations with the landfill, which is currently owned by Green for Life. These negotiations seek to resolve past violations related to odors and improper operation of the gas collection system. These negotiations are hopefully in their final stages and will result in a detailed compliance plan that requires corrective actions and enhanced system monitoring. So Eagle understands this has been a very long process, and we're hopeful with the continued cooperation from Green for Life that we'll continue to see reductions in odor and improvements in operations. Eagle will be hosting a public information session related to the settlement with Green for Life in the coming months. So back to you, Abby.
Right, thank you, Scott. So before we go to questions, I'm going to, hold on a second, let me steal the screen and do a quick tour for everyone. Okay, let me grab, whoops. Share screen, there we go. Yes, and I'm going to go over here and share. All right, so just so everyone has a quick idea, if you just type in PFAS response or MPART into your Google browser, the PFAS MPART site will come up. And we've got a couple of new things out here that are really important. The first one being there is a Arbor Hills landfill investigation tab. So if you go in through the investigation one, you can either use our web map or you can type in Arbor Hills into the search box. And we've got an updated, there's maps and there is an updated MPART webpage for that. So that's important to know that that's here, as well as there is an air quality page that Scott was just talking about, also on the Eagle webpage. And so there's a couple of different links there for you. The other thing I want to just show everyone is that if you go down to our popular pages here, we've got one for our Citizens Advisory Work Group, which I see some people in the audience that are part of our Citizens Advisory Work Group. So thank you for your service. Also wanted to show people the MPART PFAS information system that we've got out on our website. That is a newer feature and will show, has all of our surface water and MPART sites on it. So if we go to our layers, we can look at all the MPART PFAS sites. We can look at all of our surface water sampling, and then this, these blue dots are the hexagons of the public water supply. So your municipal water supply sampling are all here. And so again, you can turn those all on and off to make it a little easier to see. And we can zoom in. And anywhere in the state, you can pick a dot and see what the site is, go to the MPART website there. You can pick and look at the green dots for all of your surface water sampling. And in some cases, there's multiple results. So you can tab through the top of these. There's a lot of information there. And just know that if you want additional information, go to this eye up here because there's a lot of information about surface water sampling, how to read the codes, what the K flags are, what the method detection limit is, how many analytes are being, all of that good stuff. You can geek out on all the information. So a lot of good information out on the MPART website. So I just want to make sure everybody had a chance to see that before we jumped into our questions and answers. So let me go back to, should we go back to the PowerPoint? I feel like maybe, Scott, here's a couple, this is a picture of the Arbor Hills Eagle page. So you've got this, both of those, we've got obviously the PFAS web page as well, but then this one is specifically around the Arbor Hills air quality issues that have been going on for several years. So just know that. And then again, as Scott was talking about, there are many odor issues that are different from the energy plant versus the landfill. So just know that those were, these were slides that should have gotten into that other version. So, all right, I think we're ready to do questions and answers, right?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. We got a lot of questions that have come in. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to bring your PowerPoint back up, or Abby, you can bring it up to those slides. That's fine.
I'll let Brian do it because I think he'll be able to control the mouse. So Brian.
Yeah, that way he can point stuff out. So Brian, go ahead and share your screen. All right, everybody. So we've got quite a few questions that come in. Just to remind you, if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. And just to let you know, also, Abby did put a copy of the PowerPoint in the chat. So if you open up the chat, you'll find a copy of that you can download. And there's lots of other links that we've been shooting out too in the chat. So you can check those out, including links to the websites that we just went over. All right, so this first question I think is for Lisa at Health and Human Services. Question is, are we monitoring cancer, thyroid, liver, autoimmune diseases, et cetera, for those who live nearby?
Yeah, so we are documenting any concerns that residents may have concerning their health. And we do have an epidemiologist assigned to the site to document any of those health concerns. We have a number of projects across the state, biomonitoring projects that are taking place in areas of the state where there is PFAS contamination in residential drinking water. The results that we have currently for Arbor Hills don't indicate that there's widespread PFAS contamination in residential wells. So that's, there's no biomonitoring occurring at this site currently.
Thanks, Lisa. A couple hands up. Andrea has had her hand up for a little while. So Andrea, you can go ahead and ask your question. You can unmute your microphone.
Hello there. My question is also for Lisa. I want to know, would the pancreas be affected by PFAS contamination?
I haven't looked into details about the pancreas specifically. Like what I showed on the slides earlier, some of the human health outcomes associated with PFOA and PFOS exposure don't include the pancreas, but I can definitely look into. If you want to reach out and contact me, I'm happy to email you any information that I might find.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yep, just shoot me an email.
Thanks, Andrew, for your question. And we'll put Lisa's contact information in the chat there for you.
Thank you.
All right. Next question. And this might be more for Brett or somebody from the materials management. When does MPART anticipate the consent order and the PFAS remediation to be in place? Has Green for Life been cooperating? Maybe Abby, I don't know, who would be best for that one.
I think that one's probably mine.
Okay, Brian, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so the Water Resources Division, so I know there's two separate orders. Air Quality Division has one, and then the Water Resources Division. So our, kind of when I was mentioning with the our compliance strategy, the consent orders are part of that. And we're just kind of at the beginning stages of that. So I can't really comment on a whole lot. And in terms of whether they've been cooperating, our initial request for sample locations was, I don't want to say small, but we were looking for what was the discharge. I'm going to get to that. Oh, if I can get there. Get to that map real quick. So we had initially started and mostly requested for discharge points here, and then one in each of these water bodies, the ponds and the wetlands. They collected a lot. They have a lot of samples. We have, there's inlets in here in these detention ponds. There's so many, I didn't want to put them on the map because it would be dots and numbers everywhere. And so they kind of went into a next step, what I would say, for like source identification. So, they've been really cooperative. When we've asked for information, we've gotten it.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Stick right there because you got another question for you. You might want to keep your map up as well. This person's saying, isn't it almost obvious that the high PFAS concentrations in the wetland adjacent to the detention pond are coming from the detention pond? Is the detention pond lined?
To my understanding, these detention ponds are not lined. So it does seem obvious, right? Like, the firefighting wastewater went to this pond. I mean, it's really close there. It isn't lined, and obviously the wetland's not lined either. But there are other inputs that may be contributing. Sure, I'd bet a lot of money that was at least part of the source, but is it all of it? We don't know. So that's why we need further investigation into finding out where all the sources are.
All right, got quite a few water related questions here, of course. Where would the collected leachate be disposed by truck to? And Brett, I think you might be better with that one, actually.
Yeah, that isn't regulated by Eagle. They could take it, generally they would take it to a wastewater treatment plant, but there may be other facilities that would accept that.
It sounds like, I'm kind of getting phone a friend info here. It sounds like it's potentially going to Valacor, which is a centralized waste treatment facility.
All right, thanks. Okay, this is kind of a long question, so I'm reading it right now. Do my best to break it out for you guys. Where there had been surface water sampling with results above the threshold 12, what has been happening since the sampling last fall? Is the water with concentrations above the threshold still exiting the site into the creek? Has there been more sampling? Are there measurements to prevent surface water overflows during snowfall melts?
So it still is discharging. And that's kind of the part of the process with the consent order is there's going to be those corrective actions. And they're going to have, they're going to be proposing those to us. We're going to, work with them, and eventually they'll need to be approved by Eagle. And then they'll have kind of scheduled timelines for those things to get completed. But yeah, as of now, those are discharging, and at least, the results that we've gotten, it definitely is, they're above the threshold all the way from here. Beyond this point, we don't have any data showing any exceedances further downstream though.
All right, thanks, Brian. I got a question from somebody with their hand up, Ahmed. You can go ahead and unmute your line and ask your question.
Yes, thank you to all the panelists for the wonderful information today. I'm a resident of Northville Township. I was wondering if the PFAS could become evaporated, especially during the summer times, and then be deposited on the residential area through wind or through storms. Thank you.
Anybody want to address that one? I don't know if that's been asked before.
I'm going to jump in there,
Okay.
Jim. All right. So at this point, there are a number of ways for PFAS to be transported. Evaporation is not a common one, though. PFAS can be discharged into the air if it's attached to like a dust particle, but evaporation isn't one of them. So usually, because it's so water soluble, it stays in the water and will travel with water. We haven't seen anything where, unless it was, like firefighting foam, where the firefighting foam is drying and then, getting rained on and then respreading, something like that. But for the most part, PFAS and air emissions haven't been widely studied. And so we don't think that evaporation is a big mechanism at this point in the PFAS cycle, but that's something that hasn't been very well studied. So we'll see what the science tells us in a few years. Does that answer your question, Ahmad?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
All right, thanks for your question. Let's go on. If a major source of the PFAS and PFAS contamination was from a fire in 2016, 5 years ago, what actions, if any, has the landfill taken to address this up until now? Seems like they haven't done anything for 5 years.
So one of the important things they did was they plugged the discharge. So even though we are seeing residual effects from that, they did plug this and this. But beyond that, I don't think any actions have been taken until we started doing more further investigation into it.
Okay.
But I can't speak for the landfill, so just want to throw that out there.
Right. Brian, who's paying for the surface water and groundwater sampling?
For the vast majority of it that I've shown here, it's been the landfill. Eagle collected, let's see, go to this. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Eagle collected the sample here, a couple of them here, and then we collected this one as well. All the other results that I showed were collected by the landfill.
All right. Thank you.
And paid for. We didn't pay the landfill to collect the samples.
Right. Going back to your discussion about the fish sampling you did, are you planning to test more fish from Johnson Creek? And if so, where and when?
I don't know. I'm not I don't do any of the fish collection or anything like that. We can, oh gosh, I left his contact info. Brandon Armstrong is the one he's from Eagle's surface water assessment section. Him and his team do the collection. I can get the contact info in a little bit.
Right.
We have been prioritizing fish sampling and surface water sampling around the state. And so there's quite a few locations around the state where we're looking to gather additional data about whether fish have been impacted by potential sources. So this one, like Brian said, I can't tell you where it is on the list, but it is already on a list. And so we'll just check and see what that schedule might look like.
And I want to add something I kind of forgot. I shouldn't have forgotten, but I did. So the landfill recently submitted remediation plans for addressing the ponds, or in particular pond 2. So they have plans, and they're going to be beginning that or conducting that this year to clean out this pond here.
Okay. Thanks. Let's go to my hands that are raised. Rosemary has had her hand up for a while. Go ahead, Rosemary. You can unmute your line and ask your question.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself, didn't I? Sorry about that.
that.
Just to let you know, I'm a state senator, just to identify that, not going to trick anybody. I thought I heard you say that the wastewater treatment facilities do not filter out PFAS, yes?
Correct.
So transporting them, the leachate out to wastewater treatment facilities doesn't seem like a good plan.
Right. So they usually, wastewater treatment plants each have their own policies, but they normally will only take so much of it that they think it can normally dilute and still meet those water quality standards. So yes, they're not, what wastewater treatment plants are not willing to take high strength sources. So that's, and I do know, Brett, you can probably speak to the fact that there is on-site treatment for the leachate, correct?
Yeah, they started doing some treatment last year. I'm not sure exactly where they're at in that process now. So they did they're doing like some pre-treatment. They've done several studies at the landfill to see how well they can knock down the PFAS prior to sending it out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, they're still just diluting it. And so the other question I see, the resend thing is really that, you can dilute it, but it really never goes away and it does accumulate in fish and people. Right. So just diluting it is
Right.
just not a good enough solution.
Right, so
Well-
that's why most of the landfills are looking for ways to actually physically remove it in their pre-treatment processes. Because diluting it's not the best solution. It's
It's
sometimes the only solution for some of the wastewater treatment plants unless they want to invest in treatment technology, but it's much easier to have the sources of PFAS like landfills and so on to actually do their pre-treatment on site before they discharge any water to the wastewater treatment plants.
So in a lot of our, a lot of our facilities, including Arbor Hills, they have pretreatment that removes it prior to discharging to the sanitary sewer. So a lot of them, I'm assuming that Arbor Hills would use GAC, which is granular activated carbon. And so the carbon traps the PFAS to those carbon particles, and then those usually end up going back into the landfill itself.
Yeah,
so they
the other
separate it
thing-
out and put it back into the landfill.
Yes, and that's trapped in. So the PFAS has a strong adherence to organic particles, of which, I mean, your granular activated carbon is like a perfect vessel for that. That technology is used for a lot of things other than PFAS as well. I mean, it's the same stuff sort of that you use like on a Brita filter. And so they just use gigantic tanks of that the leachate is then sent through.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're
And
just burying the problem into the landfill.
Well, you can break down PFAS, but you have to heat it to something like 2,000 degrees, and then it breaks down into smaller chains. But that's very expensive.
It is expensive and it causes emissions.
Well, you're breaking that PFAS compound down into hopefully non-harmful components.
Yeah, I think the science in research is still trying to determine at what temperature you can incinerate PFAS at and not get harmful emissions.
Right. I know we don't have an easy solution, but
Yeah,
just moving it from one place to another is not a good choice. Obviously, it needs to get moved away from people's houses and wells. But we can't be satisfied with this.
Oh, you're on mute, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. All right. I want to keep going on. We got lots of questions coming in here to the question box. Brian, back to we talked about fish earlier. This person's asking, can you comment more on the PFAS data found the fish samples that were taken at Fish Hatchery Park? Where were the levels of PFAS higher, lower, typical of what's found near other sites?
Yeah, I can't. I got to get Brandon Armstrong he's our PFAS fish expert. I'm kind of just passing along the information. He wasn't able to make it to this meeting. So I will get that. And then I don't know, Lisa, can you say anything about that?
What was the question again? I missed the last half of that.
Yeah, this person was just asking about were the levels of PFAS PFAS that were found in the fish at the hatchery higher, lower, or typical of what's found near other sites?
Yeah, and I don't have the exact answer to this. You know, the typical or background level of PFOS in fish is not something that's really been established, just because you know, PFOS is a man-made contaminant. It's not supposed to be found in the environment. So as far as like a typical level or a background level, I don't think we have that information. But Brandon Armstrong might know something.
Right, yeah. So we can have them address that hopefully through email or something like that. Okay, let's keep moving on here. The person's asking about the link that was provided in the chat to the Eagle page for this investigation site. It says it was last updated in January 11th, 2021. Is that correct? Is that the most recent we've got?
That is, we do have some additional updates to add, and we'll have those on there soon.
Okay.
And I think that's for the air quality portion of the page too, right?
No.
Yeah, I don't know. Which one was it, Brett? Is that the
No,
one that,
that's the just the MPART.
okay. Yep. So you'll be adding some more details soon, right?
Yep.
Okay, this person's saying they sometimes walk their dog along the walking path south of Northville Ridge Sub. Is it safe for my dog to go into Jackson Creek Drain and drink the water? So I don't know, Brian or Lisa, you guys want to address that?
I guess I would say that's typically a question that we reserve for one of the MPART or one of the agencies that participates in MPART, which is MDARD, so Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. They're more up to speed on livestock and pets questions. I will say, if we were concerned about foam on a water body, we would tell people, you know, not to let their, you know, dogs into the water. We don't have a surface water foam issue at this site that I'm aware of. I don't think there's been any foam events here. But yeah, that might be a question better reserved for MDARD.
Okay. So going to my hands raised, we've got L. Malaric. Hand up, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, there are people that live near the fish hatchery between 7 and 8 Mile that have wells. Should they be concerned because this is seeping into the groundwater? Are you planning on to do any water testing for the people who have wells? And number 2, is this going to contaminate the Great Lakes?
Regarding the drinking water wells, that's in the opposite direction of groundwater flow. And again, the contamination of PFAS is in an upper zone, which is not in the same zone. Yeah, that last cross section there, you pull that up, Brian, go back right there. So those wells would likely be screened in that lower aquifer, and the upper aquifer is where we detected PFAS, and it's very limited to just that southeast corner of the landfill. Regarding the Great Lakes, I don't really have a good answer for you there, but that would be pretty complicated to try and run through that. But Brian?
I mean, well, I guess the biggest thing that we look at is the water quality value. So the surface water quality value being 12 parts per trillion, with the sample results that we've got here and, you know, downstream here at 6 Mile, I mean, those are really, really low. In fact, a lot of our water bodies would be at those levels. And even when, you know, we looked at samples that were collected upstream of the, you know, outside of their influence, they were about, you know, the same as these. So, you know, in terms of, then you get into dilution, the Great Lakes are, I mean, as everybody knows, like, they're enormous. And when you look at the the discharge that we're sending in. I don't want to discount that at all. Like that's the last thing I want to do, but it would take a lot for us to impact the Great Lakes.
Can I ask one more
Thank-
question?
Yeah, yep.
Should the, okay, I have family that has a well between 7 and 8 mile. Should they do any specific testing on their water, or where can they take their water samples because they have young children?
So if somebody's got concerns, there is on the MPART webpage, there is a tab there for people to contact the Eagle Lab, and you can do some, we'll send you a home kit. You can go ahead and take a water sample, send it back to the lab, and have PFAS analysis done. So that's pretty easy to do. Like Brett said, we wouldn't think that the landfill itself would be impacting those wells in that direction, just because we know groundwater flow goes to the south. But if you're at all concerned, definitely I would encourage people to go ahead and use the available labs. The prices have come way down. When we first started doing sampling, they were over $1,000 a sample, and now we're down to about 200 and 250, somewhere in there, that range for a drinking water sample. So that would be good.
Okay, thanks, Abby. Thanks for your question. Okay, Gabrielle has a question. Go ahead, Gabrielle. You can go ahead.
She's got to
All
unmute
right,
her.
Gabrielle, yeah, she's unmuted, but not hearing you. So we can probably come back to you, or you can type your question in. All right, we got a lot of really general PFAS related questions. I'm gonna try to get down to some of the ones that are more related to this particular site. This person's asking, has the landfill given any indication that they will be preparing to submit a request for expansion?
That's up to the landfill. I don't have any information related to that.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Next question, and it was stated that contaminated water is discharged to the sanitary sewer. Where does the sewer system discharge to?
That
Right.
goes to the Yucca wastewater treatment plant.
Yep.
And then it goes through their process, and then that discharges to, I don't know where Yucca's plant discharges to.
Okay. Going back to the person says, if the landfill plugged the outlets from their contaminated detention pond, where was all the runoff and stormwater been going since that time? Won't the pond just overflow into the wetland or another drainage course? The stormwater has to be going somewhere, or their site would be flooding every time it rains. So makes sense. What's your answer to that, Brian?
So yeah, that's a great question. So some of it's going to evaporate, and I mean, they haven't had flooding to my knowledge, but the rest is likely going to go infiltrate into groundwater. And then, going back to what Brett had showed with the conceptual site model, there's different aquifers.
Right. Can you give your best guess at when the remediation efforts will be successful in returning the discharges into Johnson Creek? Let me read that again. Can you give your best guess at when the remediation efforts will be successful in returning the discharges into Johnson Creek will meet the water quality standards? So any idea how long remediation takes?
I can't even begin to guess. I do want to mention though, I have some wonderful phone of friends, and the Yucca's discharge goes to the Huron River.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
yeah, facilities are all different, and some are more complicated than others. And so trying to say exactly when this will be meeting the water quality value, like I mentioned, there are set dates for compliance in the administrative consent order, but we're not at the point right now where we can really discuss that.
All right. Thanks, Brian. We do got a few more questions in here. I guess they got the fish sampling. And what I'll say is that if you have questions about the fish sampling,
I shoved that in the chat.
Yes, yeah.
Brandon Armstrong's contact information. So anybody who has fish questions, unless it's like health related stuff, that would be probably for Lisa. And sorry for interrupting, Jim, but Brandon would be the person to contact. So I left his email and phone number there.
Okay, yep. Okay, is the PFAS impacted residential well screened in the upper or lower aquifer unit? It goes back to maybe when you, the diagram maybe had the stratification.
That would be in the lower aquifer, but it's, you know, it's important to remember that the PFAS can be attributed to a number of things, including possibly PVC or plumbing in the house itself. So it may not even be in the groundwater. It may be part of the well plumbing system itself.
All right. Okay, David's got his hand up. David, you want to ask your question? You can go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
It's really not a question. I was just going to volunteer that I'm with the Conservancy Initiative. And if there's any follow-up information that the state wants to provide to the community, we'd be happy to post it on our website. I think we got a pretty good following that we can distribute that information, such as this fish data that we're talking about a lot tonight. And I just wanted to volunteer. We can help with that distribution.
All right, great. Thanks, David. If you want to put your name and your email address, contact information in the Q&A, that'd be good. We can pull it out and I'll share it with the team here.
I think they all have it.
Do they? Okay, good.
We do. Thanks.
All right, good deal. Thank you. All right, get back to my questions. All right. Sorry about that, I lost my space. Okay, this person is saying that they saw white foam like material in the waterway by the pathway from the Ridge Mile to 6 Mile, the boardwalk. Should we take a picture of it and report it? And if so, how? Can you guys explain a little bit about foam? I guess maybe what the differences are and when you should report it.
Yeah, there is on our MPART website. Maybe I can grab the screen for a second. Oops, that one. There we go. Share. Okay, let me put these down. On our MPART website, there is the main landing page. If you go up here to PFAS foam, there's PFAS foam on lakes and streams. On this page, if you see a PFAS foam sighting, we would like you to fill out this form because then that'll help us. It's got an opportunity to actually pinpoint it with a GPS location so that we can put it on a map. And then if we get enough of those sightings, we can make sure we get out there and take samples and do fish collection, that kind of stuff.
All right, thanks, Abby. All right.
I wanted to correct something that I said. I said that it goes to the Huron River. That's their emergency discharge location for Yucca. Yucca discharges to the Lower Rouge River. Their normal discharge goes there.
Okay.
Thank you, Aaron Sprague.
Thanks for clarifying that. All right. Given the landfill sat on this problem for 5 years, is there going to be any punitive penalties for their negligence, violations, additional charges from the Attorney General?
What problem, David, are you referring to? I don't know if you can unmute.
Oh yeah, here. If David, you want to be more specific, I guess you can raise your hand and we can get back to you. Let's see. I've got a lot of questions here, really general. So I'm just trying to, I want to get to some of the more detailed ones specific to this site first. We have a lot of conversation here about the discharges of where that goes. So thanks for clarifying that, you guys. How many creeks Creek's Eagle has been evaluated so far for PFAS and fish? Again, I think it's a fish question. Sorry about that.
I can, let
And
me
yeah, go ahead.
go to that one real quick.
Yeah,
If
you
you go
can.
to our MPART website and pick up all the surface water samples, we've done over 2,000 surface water samples in the state. And I think when we counted last time, we did 800 fish samples just this year. Excuse me. So I want to say we're probably, you know, somewhere around 2,500 different fish species in the state. And so I would have to get an exact number, but we've done a lot of fish sampling. And so in the cases, you should check out the Eat Safe Fish Guide. In cases where PFAS is the driver for a fish consumption, it'll be noted in there. But otherwise, often mercury is still the driver for fish consumption guidelines. And Lisa can jump in here because this is totally her program.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, you know, all fish that are tested by the state of Michigan are tested for mercury. A lot of them are also tested for some organic contaminants like PCBs and dioxins, depending on the location of the water body. And then, yeah, I mean, you know, over the past four years, a lot of the fish sampling that has occurred has included analysis of PFAS. So we do have a pretty robust database for PFOS in fish across the state.
And it's not a one-to-one. So Lisa could probably talk about fish for hours, but it's not a one-to-one. So just because you get a certain concentration in a fish doesn't mean that fish consumption is going to be based on that number. It's going to be a variety of factors. And so we don't post the fish concentrations. We post the fish consumption guidelines so that people can have a apples to apples comparison across the state.
All right.
I'll just add to that too. On our Eat Safe Fish website, we do also post what we call recommendation sheets, which basically have an overview of some summary statistics for fish species collected from different water bodies. I'll post the link in the chat to that, but it just kind of gives you an overview of all the different contaminants that the fish were tested for, and then kind of what the minimum, means, and maximum concentrations of different contaminants were. And that includes a lot of PFOS data as well. So I'll pop that in the chat.
All right, thanks guys. We've got to keep moving. Got a lot of questions here to get through tonight. And Brian, you can bring your slides back up if you want. If we have to point out some more things, maybe on the maps.
Yep.
This person wants to know, as the fire was in 2015, how long after did we start testing for PFAS?
Testing.
Well, yeah, let
Go ahead,
me
Greg.
take a stab at this first, and then you can jump in and correct me. So the fire was in 2016, and at that point, PFAS and MPART wasn't a thing. Abby, when was MPART started? 2018?
November of 2017. So yeah, we
17.
just started. And that was really just in like one location. So we didn't start statewide testing of drinking water supplies until 2018.
Yeah. So I guess kind of the point is that we weren't really looking for PFAS at that point and weren't linking it. I mean, even though we may have known it was there, weren't really linking it to AFFF at that point. So, you know, the investigation started not that long after we were aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Brett. If Green for Life is planning to remediate the pond that was the highest PFAS concentration, how will GFL be able to remediate the PFAS compounds that have migrated downward into the soil column as the pond is not lined? How will Eagle verify that the pond and the groundwater in upper and lower aquifers has been remediated?
So I don't have the remediation plan in front of me, but I do know that the things that they agreed to do was So there's a couple of important things. We don't have sediment criteria for PFAS. So there's nothing to compare or to know how much PFAS will be in the groundwater, and leach into that. So, there's no way to know how much sediment or what the safe, I don't know if I want to use that word, but what level of that is a concern. But they did agree to do sampling of sediments. So it's going to be kind of based on their understanding of PFAS with, working with their consultants and things like that as to what level they need to go down to. But they're going to be removing sediment.
And I just tack on to that, I think we'll also look at soil or sediment samples and make sure that they look at leach tests to determine how much PFAS may leach out of that and see if that exceeds drinking water criteria.
All right.
But ultimately, once they even get done with just this source control at the pond, if there's groundwater contamination that has occurred from that or is migrating from that, that's still their responsibility. So it may not be addressed right away with this initial remediation of the pond area, but that would have to be incorporated in the larger remediation plan or cleanup facility plans.
All right, thank you. David is back. He's got his hand up. He had a question earlier about the enforcement. So David, I'm muting your mic. You want to clarify what you had to question about there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who participated in this town hall. It was very informative, and I thought it was great. So thank you. Yeah, what I was concerned about, or my question was in particular, is with regard to the ponds being contaminated with PFAS and back in 2016, and the action, it was advanced disposal back then, but they just plugged the ponds and kind of, that's about all they did, from what I understand. And it allowed this PFAS to either go into the ground or evaporate or do whatever. And I'm just wondering, is there any punitive penalty for that? Is this going to be added to the Attorney General's lawsuit, the ongoing lawsuit she's got with them? Or, did they get I assume they got violations and things, but I'm just curious. It seems kind of like, they didn't really do much. So that was my question.
Yeah, that's going to be up to the Attorney General. I mean, I can't remotely speak to them. I don't know, Abby, if you want to speak for them.
I'm not going to speak for the Attorney General's office. What I will say is I don't believe that there's any intention to incorporate water quality issues in with an air quality order. And so there will probably be a separate water quality order that the landfill will enter into to go through the steps to achieve these outcomes and to achieve that. So as far as damages and punitive stuff, that again, it would be up to the attorneys.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for your question, David, and for clarifying for us. Earlier, Brian, you were talking about the activated carbon that's used to filter out PFAS. Person's asking, has there been any data on the effectiveness of GFL's activated carbon filtration of the leachate to reduce PFAS?
I don't have that information. I know we do have results. I don't have them though. If they want to leave their contact info, I can get that information.
I can speak in general that GAC or grain activated carbon generally is effective in treating PFAS. It may not be terribly cost effective, but it does remove, like we discussed earlier, it does remove PFAS. And right now and there's a couple other technologies that they may combine that with resin or something, another filtration system combined together that may get decent results. And I know GFL has done some work and played with those systems, and I don't have their results, but they have looked at it.
Mhm. And that's pretty typical for granular activated carbon. Is it's great for say filtering drinking water, where you've got a really clean water coming in. You're just filtering out a single contaminant or a series of PFAS contaminants. Landfill leachate can be a lot messier, can have a lot of other contaminants, can have a lot of organics, and so you're talking about a treatment train, we would call it, a series of different treatment technologies to filter it for one thing and then filter it for another thing until it can actually meet water quality standards or discharge standards to wastewater treatment plant for a whole series of things. PFAS is just one of the things that the landfill has to work on to meet discharge levels for their leachate. And so granular activated carbon can be expensive for that. And so I think they've been really looking at other options to treat not only the PFAS, but they've got volatiles, they've got metals, they've got other things that they would have to treat for.
All right. This person's asking what the cause of the fire was at the recycling plant in 2016. And another question, is there a requirement that forces leachate holding ponds to be lined? So kind of related, or two separate questions, I guess.
Yeah, those are two separate. And boy, I knew at one time what the cause, or at least what they thought the cause was, and I don't remember. It was something to do with the process. It was purely just an accident. It wasn't really related to the recycling activities. What was the other question, Jim?
Well, asking, is there a requirement that forces leachate holding ponds to be lined? So you're talking about the ones there were unlined. Is there a requirement that require them to be lined?
Well, that isn't a leachate detention pond. It's a stormwater retention pond. So since it's stormwater, it should be clean and does not have to be lined. However, with they had leachate outbreaks in the past, and that leachate commingles with surface water, and at that point it becomes an issue.
Okay. Thank you. Going back up to my board, Rosemary, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just forgot to lower my hand.
Oh.
Sorry.
All right, good to hear from you again. And Al Malarix, got your hand up? Go ahead.
I just have one more quick question. I live between 6 and 5 mile in a condo, and our irrigation is done by a well, and there are other homes that are also doing their irrigation by wells down by Sheldon and 5 Mile, and there's other condos. Is this going to be a problem? Is this a problem? Something we should be concerned about?
Again, I think though that we're looking at two different aquifers here, where you're even an irrigation well is generally going to be screened in a lower aquifer, since this upper aquifer isn't going to provide the supply that's generally needed for that kind of system. So, if it's just if you're not using it for drinking water and it's screened in that lower zone, I wouldn't expect it to be contaminated with PFAS.
Okay, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, like when they irrigate and the grass gets wet, if you're outside in the summer, should we stay off the lawns?
Again, I wouldn't expect any PFAS to be in that. They could always test that water and determine that. But again, the PFAS in the groundwater at this site is relegated to the southeast corner of the landfill. It doesn't appear to be migrating offsite or into the lower aquifer.
Okay, but if it's coming out of the south, just bear with me because I'm trying to understand if it's coming out of the southeast corner of the landfill, but it's getting to Hatchery Creek, that's north of the landfill. The water is going north of the landfill.
Hatchery Creek. I don't know, Brian. I don't know anything about Hatchery Creek.
Well, there's two things here. First, you know, the concentrations in the creeks going to the north are pretty typical of what we find across the state. So 1 to 2 parts per trillion is pretty typical and does not necessarily indicate a source. The other thing is you know, a groundwater well can be a totally different concentration than what you see in surface water. So if you have a irrigation well that is using groundwater to sprinkle for lawns, if there was PFAS in it, that contact with your feet or running through the grass is not an issue. As Lisa said in her presentation, a dermal contact with your skin and PFAS is not an issue. You're not going to have, you know, unless you're rubbing Scotchgard across your hands, you know, a part per trillion in groundwater is not going to be an issue. It's through the ingestion route. You have to drink it, eat it.
Okay.
Is where we're most concerned about. Does that
Just
help?
have it does. It makes me feel better, but I do have one quick question. So the runoff goes into our sewers. I mean, so is that a problem?
The wastewater treatment plants monitor for PFAS. So they have levels of which they, you know, they're going to tell the landfill what the level is that they have to be able to meet in order to discharge to the storms or to the sewers. So we've been monitoring wastewater treatment plants across the state now for the last couple of years, and they've all been meeting the 12 parts per trillion. So I think we're in pretty good shape. And I don't know if we've got anyone on from any of the wastewater treatment plants that would like to take that question or comment on that question. If you want to raise your hand, we can. There might be somebody on from from Yucca or from the other one.
Well, no, so just I think to clarify her point, I think that I doubt your area has combined sewers. So that would go to the storm sewer system. Any runoff from, you know, lawn watering or anything like that would go into the storm sewer, and those would go to your surface water bodies. So it'd be like Johnson Drain. And yeah, we don't have any reason to believe that your irrigation well would have PFAS in it. So, and that wouldn't, the runoff from there that goes like onto your, you know, sidewalks or, you know, into the road, it would have to be contaminated before it would be a problem for us.
Okay. I guess I would just feel better knowing that someone's looking into that as being an issue, because otherwise, how can we be sure? I mean, they've had a lot of violations for several years, and you know, there could be other things seeping into the ground as well, into our well water, and I'm really worried about it. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, I think honestly, the safest thing like that I would recommend is what Abby had mentioned before too, is like anybody who, you know, has significant concerns, you do have the option of having your well water tested.
Okay.
So maybe that would be a really good idea. Cause you know, like you said, you know, like kind of better safe than sorry, like you don't know. So like I've sent all sorts of samples to the lab, and, you know, they're, usually takes, I don't know with ours, but it's usually 3 weeks, sometimes faster to get the results back. That might make you feel better.
And if we got, okay, I'll do that. If I got bad results, do I have to report it, or does the state get notified if somebody, you know, based on the testing that you guys do?
If you send those sample to us through the Eagle Lab, and if for some reason it comes up above a drinking water standard, the lab will let us know. But we'd also want to work with you to try to determine what the cause of that might be.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to post the MPART web link in the chat right now for the page for the private residential well sampling stuff. So you'll have that in the chat. So you can grab that link.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Abby, for putting that in there. Thanks for your question. Aaron, do you want to go ahead and comment?
I'll just clarify that the system is a separate sewer system. It is not a combined sewer system. And also the runoff from the landfill does not enter the sewer system. A portion of their leachate does. That portion does receive pre-treatment and the concentrations are monitored.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Can you just clarify where you're from?
I'm from Western Townships Utilities Authority. We're the regional sewer authority.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. Appreciate it. All right, you know, we're getting close to wrap it up with our questions here. I do want to. Oh, it looks like Gabrielle's got her hand up again. We'll see if she's able to ask her question now. Gabrielle, you just have to unmute your mic and hopefully we can get you on. There should be a button to unmute and you can ask your question. All right, unfortunately, we're not able to hear from you.
While she's doing that, I just posted in the chat a link to, it's called cluein.org, but it's sponsored by EPA. It's all about remediation technologies and cleanup information. And so I just posted that in the chat for people. I noticed there was at least one question that asked about additional treatment technology information, posting some links. So
great, thank you. Just kind of wrapping up here, we did have several people ask about PFAS and source control and kind of like at a higher level, what's Michigan doing to basically prevent products that use PFAS from getting into the landfills? And is there anything specific we might want to do for this landfill to educate consumers who are in the area disposing in this landfill about that some of the trash they dispose of contains PFAS? So I don't know, Abby, if you or Brad or anybody wants to talk at a higher level on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's more of a societal consumer question about all the different products that contain PFAS, which there's a lot, and some of them we don't even realize yet. Obviously, we know carpet contains PFAS. A lot of our carpet is, stain coated. There's, our clothes, when we go to wash our clothes, there's some PFAS that comes off just from the waterproofing or stain proofing type of stuff. So there's so many different things at this point. I don't think we have a good handle on the actions that the consumers can take that's going to make a significant impact to landfills. So right now, landfills are being very careful about high concentration sources that they might take. I don't think they're very worried at this point about taking consumer waste. I think they're more concerned about taking, high strength sources where you may have a spill of firefighting foam and you've got soils you got to clean up. That's the stuff that makes them worried because they know they have to put it in, make sure it gets into a special section of the landfill and it's carefully monitored. So at this point, I think we're still a few years out from being able to identify all the things that have PFAS in them and how to best handle those. I imagine that we will get to a point where people are going to ask for PFAS-free everything, right? But it's in a lot of different compounds. And the ones that we've been talking about tonight, PFOS, PFOA, are those 8-chain compounds. And a lot of the industry is transitioning to other PFAS, shorter chain that have lower toxicity, but they're still PFAS. And so I think we really need to rethink, have broader societal type of conversations about rethinking our chemical use in our country and in our products. So it's a tough one.
I know the governor, didn't she just sign an order or a bill, one of the two, about state's purchase of PFAS or products containing PFAS, if I remember right.
Yeah, good catch, Brian. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, Governor Whitmer did sign an executive order asking the state agencies not to purchase things containing PFAS if at all possible. You know, in some cases there are some situations where that wouldn't be possible, but if there's PFAS alternatives or products without PFAS, we are to buy those products first. And so that's just coming into implementation, and we're looking at what that might mean for the state. So yeah, incremental change.
Yes. Thank you all. You know, is there anything else? I think we answered pretty much all the questions that I've gone through. I don't know if anybody in the team saw anything else that we need to address, or you want to follow up on anything more.
Somebody's posted twice about whether or not the sampler should be a PFAS qualified person. We definitely would like whoever is sampling for PFAS to be trained on how to collect a good representative sample using appropriate techniques, so you're not cross-contaminating with PFAS containing materials inadvertently. So, but you know, there's no certification program or anything for like that. We're trying to train everybody as we go. And I think we've been pretty successful. We haven't had too much of an issue with PFAS and cross-contamination from other PFAS containing materials in the last few years. So we've seen that.
Okay. One more question. Looks like Streethar's got hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, Jim, this is Sri with YCWA. Just want to provide some information. Arbor Hills does discharge to YCA their leachate, and they are required to monitor for PFAS for the discharge of leachate. And we do monitor our discharge to the local gauge monthly. And we've been pretty good so far. And we've been trying to meet the water quality standard, and we had pretty good success so far. So I just want to let your audience know.
Great.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for letting us know that.
Appreciate that. All right, does anybody else in the team have anything else you guys want to add before we wrap it up here?
I just think that there's so much to learn about PFAS. So keep an eye. The other thing on our MPART website, there is we send out a weekly update through MPART on sites that are being added and webinars, that kind of stuff. So if you want to sign up on our MPART website for updates, that would be another good way to keep in the loop and just know what's going on.
And Abby, I'm sorry, Jim, I know somebody had mentioned here about using bacteria and funguses to treat PFAS. And I know that or PFAS, and I know that there are so many different researchers around, not just in the US, but around the world that are working on different technologies. And I mean, how great would it be if we find one that we can, you know, like a bacteria that we can just inject into the ground, feed it some whatever it likes to eat, and then it just breaks down that PFAS. That would be great. But I know we have a technology work group. I'm not a part of that one, but that they look into that stuff, right?
Yeah, we're trying to keep an eye on it's the research and remediation and research treatment technology is just going crazy out there. So there's a ton of it going on at all different levels, a lot in our universities and research facilities. So we're trying to keep an eye on it. I think that there's some promising pilot studies, bench scale testing being done, but we want to see if it can handle something full scale like this. Can it go out into a pond like this size and be able to remediate it in situ versus having to pump the whole pond out, dry it out, you know, take it off site and treat it. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I'm very, very hopeful for PFAS, at least, because there's so many people looking into it and so much money being poured into it that I think we're going to turn the corner on understanding this a lot quicker than we have for other contaminants in our past. And so, you know, Michigan's been out there ahead of a lot of the country, but we're starting to see EPA really push on many initiatives. And so I'm very hopeful that this is going to help all of our sites as well be able to, you know, cash in on treatment technologies and the best science that we've got out there.
All right. Well, I think it's about time for us to wrap it up then. If nobody else has anything else you want to comment on, I will. All right, I'll wrap it up. I did put in the chat just a second ago the direct link to sign up for MPART web updates that Abby mentioned. So if you wanted to keep up to date with PFAS, if it's your thing, you want to keep up to date and learn more about it, keep on top of what we're doing at the state level, that's where you can sign up. So I want to thank our team of experts here from Eagle and DHHS that helped us with this presentation. Be sure you all go out to those websites that we linked and check that information out. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. There's a lot of really good, thoughtful questions, and it really made our time here work really well. So thank you all for that, and hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time.